the different questions around how this commons, how this education commons is managed, by whom, and the layer that technology adds into it. And then I'll just introduce each of the speakers. And the format that we're going to do is each person will come up to the podium and give his presentation. I will be taking my own questions about what's being said. When each of the speakers is done, I'll begin the Q&A with some of the questions that this discussion has raised, or the presentations have raised for me, and then I'll make sure to save time to turn over for Q&A for the audience. In my experience in managing conversations on stage is typically your questions are always better than mine. So please keep your ears open and don't be shy at all to ask what you're thinking, because this is really only relevant to the extent that you're in conversation with the speakers here, okay? So to begin with, sitting next to me, Jay Kumar Sahu is Regional Director for NRDC, Government of India. Next to him is Dan Sheffett, a lawyer at the Paris Court of Appeal, and best known, I would say, for suing Google and winning. That's, you know, that will be in the eulogy. No, I wasn't rushing that to be exactly. Gaurav Kumar is head of strategy for special initiatives at Reliance Jio. And Ananta so close. Durayappa, I practiced for so long. Ananta Durayappa is director for UNESCO MGIEP. And so we're going to begin with you, Gaurav, if you don't mind, and you can go to the podium to give your presentation.
Thank you, Arti. You did better as far as pronouncing Ananta's name this time than last session, so congratulations. I have been told to set the context for the session and share some of the experience insight about the school education ecosystem in the country. I will be India specific. The kind of data intervention, the kind of technology intervention which is happening in school education, and how that conversation comes about who owns the data, you know, and how the data flows to the larger ecosystem, and how privacy, how uses, misuses, etc. Could be envisaged, and probably you know, speakers after me will take from there. So let me give you some data. I guess start with certain numbers. We have almost 1.5 million schools in the country, 1.6 odd million schools. In fact, Indian school education ecosystem happens to be one of the largest across the world. Around 270 million kids in the schools. Out of that, 130 odd million school children are with schools which are with various state boards. As you would know, school education, large boards happens to be respective state boards, as well as CBSE and ICSE. I will not name IB and others because that's very few and not many great numbers. So let's understand why equity and efficiency becomes important, because we are a country where you know, we always talk about demographic dividend. We always talk about how our education system has been able to create talent across sectors, has done great work across world, including where Aarti comes from, Silicon Valley. You know, a great deal of Indian engineers, data scientists, you know, technology guys who are contributing. But at the same time, if you look at some of the work, whether you know it is PISA report or it is a SIR report which is done locally, the kind of learning outcomes, the kind of grade-wise reading and writing abilities which are in our schools are extreme concern. And that's where the focus comes on learning outcomes. Are we doing right things in our classrooms? Are we teaching our kids, you know, how to write or read as per their grade level? The fundamental challenge has been, and I guess lots of debate has happened about kind of teacher quality we have in the ecosystem. I will not go much into that, but some of the solutions which are very important. One, the kind of teacher training we do in school education, the kind of B.Ed, M.Ed colleges we have, and how do we, you know, take them through a growth where they are able to create right kind of teachers which have understanding of be it introducing technology in classrooms or gender sensitivity or adolescence issues and so on. Second, it becomes very important that technology in classroom gets embedded to a level, to an extent where it should be. Because unfortunately, it seems to be bad experiences as far as public school education system in this country goes about technology in the classroom. Once we say technology, most of the people think about a content on the video which can be projected on a screen and does the job. But to be fair, not necessarily. The technology is much beyond. And because there has been lots of conversation yesterday as well about AI in education, how do you bring AI in classroom and the data it produces as a byproduct, how that can be used to drive very personalized, very specific kind of learnings to the kids. Extremely important. To give an example, today if you look at a textbook, today if you look at a study material, today if you look at online content, whoever without naming, it is always a one-size-fits approach, fits all approach. So personalized learning is going to be the way, and to drive that, it is very important that we start capturing data. Let me just try to detail that out a bit. Some people will learn through visuals very well. Some people will learn through audios very well. Some people will learn through text very well. Some people will learn through images very well. Kids, how do we take them into account while we create personalized learning paths for each of them? I guess that's where the next set of learning will happen. Me and Aarti were speaking this morning about teaching machines, because somewhere it is realized that training teachers to the level we want them to be is going to be an extremely expensive proposition. And you use AI to create teaching machines which will come and enable, support, work with existing set of teachers to do their job better. Please note all of this, what I am saying, will have data as a byproduct. And that's what the conversation is in terms of how do you use the data to, one, track a teacher's performance, create training path for those teachers, understand learning behavior, learning aptitude, learning background of a kid, and curate content accordingly. I guess UNESCO, MGIP also has a great deal of focus there. How to ensure that all of this ties to equity and efficiency in education? That's the topic of the session as well. So some of the work, let me try to see, which we are trying to do as well, is one of them happens to be how do you ensure that technology becomes an enabler, data network becomes an enabler to the classroom, so that a great teacher who teaches in one of the better-known schools in a large metro, his or her teaching is also reaching to the kid who was in some hinterland, who studies in some hinterland village of the country. How to do that? You obviously can't, clone this teacher and take him to 1 million schools, but you can probably use technology as a distribution network to take that, teacher to the classroom. One. Second is, best kind of content. How do you ensure that this content is not limited to the Ivy Leagues in a school ecosystem, but also reaches to the wider masses? Again, technology has a great role to play there. Teachers training, it is a huge challenge area across the value chain. How do you ensure that a teacher's, teaching style is taken in account to curate, the relevant content for them? How do you ensure that how learners are learning is being introduced in teachers' training as well, so that teachers are, So I read a quote somewhere that if your teaching style is not delivering the kind of learning you want it, there is a flaw in your teaching style, because learners are never at fault. Learners, idea should be to curate a teaching style which works for each of the learner in a classroom. There could be 40 kids in a classroom, and all of them have a very different learning style. But somewhere the technology should be able to curate a path for each of them. So these are some of the existing situation in classrooms, some of the solutions which could be proposed in the classrooms. I guess what will become very important is that there is an inclusive shared vision created with private sector, with educationists, with people who are working in technology, with multilateral bodies like UNESCO, and with technology companies like us. And once I say shared vision, government agencies become very important, because eventually they are the custodian of large education ecosystem in the country. Unless you don't have shared vision, it will not work. A very interesting thing I learned while I was trying to work with the school education system is, no large social cause has worked without private and public sector, civil society, and public agencies coming together. Take an example of apartheid. It was supported a big deal by civil society in the background. Take an example of polio eradication in the country, in India. It supported a big deal by private sector at the background. Take an example of same-sex marriage. It was supported a big deal by private sector and philanthropy, civil society at the backdrop. Similarly, I believe if we want to make an impact at the 270 million school children scale, it is very important that all the stakeholders come together to work around it. I guess the conversation about data will be there, as is in many sectors otherwise as well, whether it is technology, whether it is Google, whether it is your social media, or it is search or map, will happen in education as well. But that conversation, I'm a firm belief, will shape up as we, make some of the first steps which are required. So I guess my 4 minutes odds are over. I'm happy to take up any question as we go ahead. That sounds good, Aarti? Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
We'll do questions at the end after the presentations. Thank you. And so next we'll ask Anantha, if you'd like to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Aarti. I'm going to make my intervention very short by proposing 3 models, following up from Gaurav's provision of the overplay in India, but I think it relates to even other countries around the world. So I look at it as 3 models. The first model is where, and I'm going to focus primarily on the ownership of the information. And as I had alluded in my earlier interventions on yesterday's presentation on 2 levels of information, what I call first order information and second order information. My first order information is basically what I relate to the content or the curriculum, which we see a lot of time on, it's on the net, on platforms. So if it's the content on Google School, that's a first order information. The second order information is the behavioral aspects that come out from or exhibited by the student using that content. How fast did the child learn? What were his reactions? And now we can even sort of see not just the intellectual reactions, but also emotional. As we showed when we launched Kai, you can actually track the sentiment analysis and the emotional analysis of the child as the child is interacting with the content. So the 3 models that I'm going to propose is about more on the second level, the second order information. The first order information, I don't see too much of an issue because the property rights are pretty straightforward on that, the ownership of those, of that content or curriculum. The first model would be the very simplest, which is happening right now, is that the second order information is owned by the company or by whoever who holds the content, the first order information. So they automatically own that second order and it's confined to them. So if you have 6 different platforms, let's say you got Google School, you got Summit, you got all the different, I think the local one is Beiju or some. So they own the second order information which is generated when children are on that platform. The second model that could come up is that the ownership of that information still is with the company, but they pool it to what I call the commons. So they own that information which is generated from the users on their platform. Then you have another which owns that. But all of them then pool to the commons. Why do they pool to the commons is because AI, the training of the AI is very dependent on the amount of data that is generated. So more the data, the better the training. And so they benefit from the commons rather than just restricting it to their own little source of information. And I call the commons the Internet of Education. The third model is that the companies or whoever has those platforms, I use the term company in a very generic way, it could be governments as well, or other stakeholders. The third model is one where the holder of the first order information has no ownership whatsoever of the second order. It automatically goes to the commons. And it's managed so the next interesting question that pops up is who governs the commons? I use the term commons because I draw from work that I've done previously in my previous life on natural resources. And there's this huge literature on the commons. And if there's no management of the commons, you basically deplete it. And in this case, you basically destroy that information. You misuse, there's a potential for abuse and misuse. So I don't have any answers. So that's a good thing. A typical academic, I just put a lot of questions and I have no answers. And that's for Aarti to work at. So give her the marching orders. And she'll find the answers by the time we are finished with this session.
The nature of journalism is asking questions, not giving answers.
So she's not wanting to get out of her comfort zone there. But I want to leave with one, and this has been provocative towards Dan, is that AI can be beneficial, and especially for learning. So my hope is that we don't kill it by over-regulating to a point that nobody is willing to provide that information for the common good. But of course it can be abused and misused. And so I think what we should be working for is how can we get this collective public or social good that will benefit the children today as well as in the future by all that information that they're generating about how they learn, but at the same time protecting them that they will not be penalized by this information later. So I think examples have been given up where you could have sort of said, they have information about your performances in your early years and that kind of acts against you in your later years. God forbid, if they had that information on me, I would not be here now. Because I was a late bloomer. I didn't speak until 7 and didn't even look at a textbook until I was 28. So I was kind of winging it for most of the life. But if we had that kind of data, it could be used in a detrimental way. But that data has to be protected. So that's the challenge, and I think we are just initiating that discussion. And I think it's something that needs to take on a much higher level of discussions at the international level. I don't think this should be done at the national level. And don't quote me on this, I'm not sure how many reporters, don't quote me on this, but I think this is the area where the UN, and in particular my own agency, UNESCO, which is the custodian for education, should be looking at. And I believe that the new Director General is going towards that direction because artificial intelligence is high on our agenda, but not in a negative way. It is about it being good, but we need to make sure that we harness it for good and not abuse it. So I leave you with those three models, and in fact, it might be an interesting theme for a very nice paper where we use the commons literature for the education space. Thank you very much.
Next, I'll ask Vijay Kumar Sahu to give his presentation, which comes with a PowerPoint as well, so can cue that up.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely sorry that my voice is not good as Aarti. Am I right? So please forgive me. I'm suffering
I
from
think your
cold
voice
and
is beautiful for what it's worth.
okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anant at MGIP, and also I'd like to thanks Madam Aarti to give me opportunity. And it is a great privilege for me when we talked about education, innovation, and sustainable development, how we create impact to the society, bringing some kind of hope. And I'm fortunate that Honorable Additional Chief Secretary is here. I'll just, since I am sitting at Visakhapatnam, on behalf of my organization under Ministry of Science and Technology, and also WIPO, I look after WIPO Technology Innovation Support Center, how we're going to the educational institution, bringing innovation, inculcating innovation, and protecting the knowledge created by the ecosystem. Just I would like to brief you, and also Dan told me that seeing is believing. So I'll show you some of our activity, how we are creating some impact to the society. Maybe a small innovation, but it has a great impact to the society at large. Can you, yes. Next. Okay. In the knowledge economy, we are part of the WTO, and WTO, as per the WTO TRIPS, we must have to protect our knowledge. Although, as an Indian, we believe Vasundhaivam Kutumbakam, but at the same time, a lot of R&D is happening, and I will talk in a different context of education and innovation, and practically where India stands being an Indian, and what we are doing for our society, how the people get connected to the institutional mechanism. Institutional mechanism is very, very important for the knowledge economy or the innovation ecosystem. Yes, there is a paradigm shift of innovation. Everybody talks about innovation in different areas in terms of technology, organization, in terms of marketing innovation, any process and product innovation is concerned. So innovation plays a very important role today to prosper any organization as far as the knowledge economy is concerned. So where we stand as an Indian, if you see the Global Innovation Index, our position it is the second largest population country in the world, but if you see where India stands as far as the Global Innovation Index is concerned, because education is one of the parameters, we are at number 57. We are gradually improving from 81 to 57, and this is, I thought, should share with you where India stands. As a citizen of India, we should know where India stands, and being a knowledge worker, we should know that. And we have a number of programs initiated by the government of India, like Startup India, Make in India, Digital India, and also new education policy of 2016 is put in place. And in the Startup India, when we'll go to any education ecosystem, let me tell you, since I'm last 18 years I am in the system, I came last year to Visakhapatnam from Delhi. Our education system, let me tell you, is a traditional system. Still now, we have not built that capacity among our academicians. Still they are thinking their job is to teach only. They have not incorporated the mindset that they should come out some ideas, some creativity, and that is lacking in our institutional system. And that ecosystem we have to build, and many students have a many number of creativity, how we can nurture that creativity and how connect that creativity to the appropriate institutional platform, and the student, teacher, as well as that institution get benefited, at the large society will get benefit out of it. How we are creating impact, I'll just show you some of the statistic information. In India, we talked Lakshmi and Saraswati, the god of knowledge and god of money, is never live together. But in the knowledge economy, both can live together. And what we are doing, I'll just like to apprise you. So one of the greatest challenges before India is intellectual property right. My previous speaker talked about role of intellectual property. In the WTO era, we must acknowledge the knowledge created by somebody. So acknowledging nothing but the respecting intellectual property. And that is the mechanism we are not having in the country like India. And our country has been kept a priority watch list by a developed country like US. We are under special 301 provision. Any process, any product, what we have developed, who have developed, must be protected because there is a creativity of that individual from that institution, and that product may be give benefit to the society at large when that product we connect the industry, and that industry will come with some kind of goods and product to the market. That is a recognition. So many issues are there as far as this intellectual property is concerned. I'll just speak about the copyright issue, because number of in the world, the world economy is losing more than $52 billion every year because of piracy and imitation. And India, as per the report, India is losing $3,027 million every year as far as the piracy is concerned. Piracy is the greatest challenge for the nation, how we have to build the capacity across the knowledge economy from the triple helix of knowledge, governance, and also institution and the public. We need to build that kind of ecosystem. And you might have seen many of the people knowingly or unknowingly infringe the intellectual property. Suppose Dr. Ananta Durai Raj has developed something, created something, or published something, I must acknowledge knowledge. That is nothing but the intellectual property. If I am quoting somewhere, I must in an ethical way. That is the lacking, that institutional mechanism is lacking in the country, and many of the people are caught in plagiarism or infringement of intellectual property right. That is very, very important today when we are talking about digital technology, digital knowledge, or the education in digital technology. Where we stand, as for the, since the program, I thought I should apprise you all where India stands. It is the second largest populous country in the world, but as far as our innovation index is concerned, we are much more behind. So what are the lacuna we have? How we can build our regional innovation ecosystem that can also parallelly go together to the national innovation system, and now innovation system is moving toward international innovation system. I am here at Visakhapatnam. I look after the Technology Innovation Support Center. My responsibility is to inculcate innovation among the institution, MSME, startup, and also industry. And recently, I thought I should share with you. The professor from Calcutta University developed a cigarette filter. The beauty of that invention is he got a project from Government of India. The beauty of that invention, I'd just like to inform you, is that it blocked the nicotine, which is carcinogenic in nature. So that knowledge where we got from a university, and we connect that knowledge to the industry where a startup came forward and invest, and that from that new product and process, whole community will get benefit. That is called nothing but the knowledge management, knowledge transfer from the university ecosystem to industry ecosystem. Because not single university from in India are top 100 or top 20. That's very, very important, how we can strengthen that ecosystem. We talked about MIT, we talked about Harvard, but we are not talking about our own ecosystem where we are staying. This is one of the young chaps who has a beautiful innovation. He came to my office and he told that I have developed something. He's a very poor family, came from Anantapur, and what we did, we first helped him to apply for the Innovation Award, and how that innovation, he got the Innovation Award from Honorable President of India, and now the beauty of his invention is many people, he developed a pole climber. Without going conventional way, the electrician can go as per his invention automatically to the pole and connect the electricity. So that is the affordable innovation in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, where the innovation must be equitable, affordable, adaptable, and available for common people. That is the role. And recently one young chap came from Visakhapatnam. He has developed a fire extinguisher. See, this is a fire extinguisher. But can you open directly if there is a fire? No. Because suddenly you will see, when you see the fire, automatically your BP or your health condition goes, you will be nervous. But he has developed an automatic fire extinguisher. If there is a fire, you can throw and it douse fire. This is small kind of affordable innovation, I can say. And this is nothing but we have to create and sustain our own way, in our own economy, in our own society. So I am here, I goes to any student who have an idea, we protect, nurture that idea, help that student to, for some kind of helps in their career. So we are playing a little role to create a small impact, small change in the society. That is very, very important today. And this is one of the technology, sorry, how can I go back? I just, okay, how much time I have? Okay, so thing is that we are here to build the capacity and capability of the different player of the knowledge economy, and I am sitting here at Innovation Valley under Andhra Pradesh Innovation Society of Government of Andhra Pradesh. Any faculty, any student, any researcher has any idea, we will help to nurture that idea, protect that idea, and also sustainably we can get some kind of benefit from that idea, because as far as India is concerned, we are not self-reliant on technology. We are still now importing technology so that we can build our own capability and credibility in the world. So thank you for giving me an opportunity and also presence hearing. God bless you all. Vande Mataram. Mobile number is there. Anybody can talk to me for any kind of activity, particularly on knowledge management, intellectual property, and innovation management.
We're going to get to questions after the last speaker, that you can hold on. Dan Sheffett, thank you.
I didn't know we were going to make a presentation now. I think it's a great idea. And if I understood your question right, I want to make a few points first on one of the things I mentioned at another session yesterday, which is the difference between raw data and the data that has an economic value. Now, I mentioned yesterday that in Europe, the consensus is that nobody has any property rights over raw data. Raw data is the personal information on you, your name, where do you live, how old are you, that kind of thing. Nobody owns that information, and nobody can actually sell that information as such. The information that represents an economic interest, whether for universities or for any other activity, is the profile that you create on the basis of that data. Let me give you an example. I don't know whether this app still exists, but I had great fun using it a couple of months ago. I think it was discontinued. Some people sat down and they said, if you download this app, you can actually see how Facebook profiles you. And that's much more interesting than knowing what the data they have on you is. You can actually get that data. At least you can get that in Europe. On Article 15 of the General Data Protection Regulation, you can ask Facebook to send you the data they have on you. But that's totally uninteresting. What you want to know is the profile that they have on you. And this app, and if it still exists, try and download it. I don't know whether there's any malware or spyware in it, but just for fun. Try and see the profile that Facebook has on you. It gives much more information than just, your name and that kind of thing. Of course, the main information is your consumer interests. What are you most likely to buy, when, what, where, and so on and so on. That's the data that represents an economic interest. It's not the raw data, it's the profile data. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was this data protection officer from one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. They generate a lot of data in-house, but they also buy data. And I asked her, how do you price that data? What is the value of that data? What is the market? How does it work? And this is one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. And actually, she was very transparent about it. It seems to be direct negotiations each and every time, like any other negotiation. That's pretty okay. But there's no standard way of pricing it. But indeed, in my opinion, it should be transparent. I know it doesn't answer your question, but I will take this opportunity to share that opinion with you. I think that the first step in the way is that whatever is paid for your profile, you sitting down there, you should have a right to get to know what is the value of you and what are people going to pay to get your information. That, I think, is the first step on the way. And that should also apply to the data that is collected and profiled and sold in the university environment. There is a big distinction also to be made, not only between the raw data and profile data, but also between data and information. Since we're talking about universities, I just want to make a very important point is that, of course, there are no property rights to information. Look at what happened with the genome. You all remember that, right? We expected it would take like 10 years or maybe 20 years to crack the genome. And everybody got together with their personal computers, and we created this enormous decentralized effort in cracking the human genome. And we did it just in a matter of a couple of years. This decentralized effort, which is really humanity working and cracking one of the greatest mysteries ever embedded in our DNA, belongs to nobody. Science belongs to nobody. I think it's extremely important to make that point. So really the only economic value that we have here, the only thing that is covered by any intellectual property right is the profiled data. I want to make another distinction, the distinction between public and private. I think that was your question, Artie. Let me illustrate that by a really interesting case. Would you say that YouTube is a university? That question was actually put to the appeal court in California recently in a case which was started by a university called Prager. Now, Artie knows that Prager University is considered to be a fairly conservative university in the US. And when they put videos up on their YouTube channel, YouTube, i.e. Google, decided, for whatever reason, to make it a bit hard to get access to these videos. They didn't disallow them, but they made it like restricted content. The interesting point was that exactly the same content when it came from other universities was not restricted. So you ask yourself what moved YouTube to apply the policy. So Prager University sued YouTube, i.e. Google, to say that it was a violation of free speech, that they had exactly the same right as anybody else because YouTube was actually acting as a university platform for them, and they had exactly the same right as anybody else to get their message out. Unfortunately, the First Amendment in the US does not apply to private corporations. It only applies to public. And YouTube, as you all know, is private. So they lost the case, YouTube won that case. And I think it's extremely important that we understand the difference between public and private. It's a big debate going on in the US as to free speech in private universities as opposed to public universities. And that debate has to take place on a global basis, a global level, because I think that that distinction between public and private is doomed to fail. And one last word on that. Everybody probably knows what MOOCs are, M-O-O-Cs, right? MOOCs are developed by different universities. They're created for platforms, they're created for the internet, and you can actually take a degree by following a MOOC course. You can actually get a diploma on the internet. And the question is really here, whether, to what extent the university that allows you access to the MOOC as such, one, can charge for it. Many of them do. Many of them do. But is it actually legal to do so to the extent that the MOOC course contains scientific information which we just saw is not covered by intellectual property rights? And what does that fact that you have to pay for certain MOOC courses and thereby get the diploma, what does that do to equality These are some of the very, very important questions that we have to raise. I don't know whether you have time now, Artie, but I just want to make these points. Thank you.
So I'll start us with a question or two and then move over to the audience. I would say that the first question I have is really about a kind of fundamental assumption here. If you look around the world, across many, many countries, it is extremely common that teachers are taking money from their own pockets, from their own salaries, to pay for the costs of a classroom. Classrooms around the world, this is true in the United States as well, not just India. Classrooms are grossly underfunded. It is also the case that in much of the world, being a teacher is not a prestigious job. It's the job of someone who couldn't get a better job. Now, I describe those kinds of problems because when we're talking about data ownership and managing the education commons, if you can call it that, one aspect of that conversation that to me is an enormous red flag is the power differential. That do we actually have the interests of students well organized and protected when entering into policy conversations? Or does that not really exist? Is this conversation happening at a moment where the interests of students are not particularly well protected, but there are companies that have inordinate power? So I guess the first question I have for you is, when you step into this conversation, whether it's in India specifically or in an international framework, how do you think about the way that the interests of the student are represented and protected and the relative power of it in this debate?
Let me take an attempt, and Ananta, I will need your support on the international context. I guess let me try to answer on Indian context. See, we need to understand that the problem statement of the question which you are asking is probably third order or fourth order, because currently the whole focus, at least in Indian context, has been trying to provide the basic accessibility. If you look at some of the flagship initiatives of Government of India or various state governments, the whole idea was to take a school to the kid, to put a teacher in the classroom, and ensure that there is NER, net enrollment ratio, or GER, gross enrollment ratio, are getting better year on year. Take an example of some of the most flagship initiative which had run for last decade or so, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, education for all, if I may translate it crudely, was largely about providing basic infrastructure, a roof above your head, a toilet, and a teacher. And if you have money, put some ICT in the classroom so that basic content, in a digitized format can be delivered. So there may be, some exception here and there in some of the states. I see Mr. Das looking at me very intently, so making the disclaimer. But by and large, the policy conversation has been around that. Of late, findings of be it local ASER reports, ASCR, or global PISA findings. India refused to be part of PISA after the last report for many years because two states which participated, Tamil Nadu and Himachal Pradesh, had very poor, learning and reading and writing skills grade-wise findings. India was probably, just ahead of Kyrgyzstan in the overall ranking, if I remember it right, much behind the many Asian countries even. That's where somewhere the narrative has changed. People have started talking about enough on infrastructure, enough on focusing on NER, net enrollment ratio, which essentially means 100 kids in the school-going age group, bring them to 100, get all of them to school. That's what NER, essentially means. But the focus is now on learning outcomes. And the moment you talk about learning outcomes, I guess there's some of the topics which I touched upon, teacher training, getting the right kind of learning aids in the classroom, or getting right kind of technology in the classroom, getting right kind of, and the whole conversation which takes place between a school education board in a state, the apex body in a state, to a primary school and every stakeholder in between. How do you streamline all of that? How do you make it more efficient is something which is now getting into policy rooms. Thankfully, there seems to be a certain degree of openness to engage with people, and I will again take liberty to quote Mr. Das. He said that government works on a consultative approach. We hear you, we hear you, we hear you, and then we try to take a decision based on the collective wisdom and disseminating that. So government is trying to do that. Once that happens, and as it progresses, I guess the conversation around data will begin. That who owns this data. For example, there is a learning management system company or a school management system company which goes and provides the school management system solutions to classrooms. The data is coming to the state government. Now state government, the onus is on the state government or the public agency to engage rightfully with the service providers like classroom solutions, like content solutions, like precise learning solutions to ensure that the data privacy issues are sorted. The only urge I have there with public agencies is and you and me spoke in the morning about it, they need to reach out to experts. They need to reach out to people who understand data privacy issues in the classroom about education and ensure that the right kind of safeguards are in place. So that would be my take as far as India's approach to policy-related decisions, policy-related interventions about taking students' interest in account and building right kind of framework goes. I guess Ananta can probably add if he wants to about international as well as Indian context.
If I'm going to take it to that level, I want to get back into my roots of training and I want to bring in the economics. I think we haven't really touched that, and it's purely been an ethical, social discussion. The challenge is that if you look at a typical social cost-benefit analysis, so I've been breaking down some of the costs and benefits. The costs, I think it goes at both levels. The costs are primarily at the individual in terms of if there's an abuse in the privacy, what are those costs? The benefits come from a process that produces those costs, i.e. the benefits can only come when you collect the collective information from every individual. Because it's just yours doesn't make any, because the whole notion of AI and helping in learning is getting that data. And people are gathering that data. I'm looking at it purely from an altruistic perspective, that I'm gathering that data to help in the learning. I am not profiling the child for any other purposes. And I don't even think I need to profile the child. So I just need to know what are the variables that are having an impact on learning, and I'm mapping it onto children with variables to sort of see what kinds of interventions and stuff. So the question is, does a social cost-benefit analysis a framework to use in making decision on the level of privacy or the level of protection? I think there are trade-offs. Life is full of trade-offs. So are we willing to lose some of that privacy to get the benefit from providing my information under this assumption that everybody else provides that information so that I can benefit from that? So you might get to a prisoner's dilemma. Actually, this is getting quite interesting in a sense that you want to benefit but not give that information. So and not give that information, hoping that the others give that information, but you don't. So then we get into a problem in terms of, well, if everybody has that particular position, then we don't get that information. So it is a complex problem. So again, no answers. But I still think it has to go beyond the national borders. It has to go at the international level. it has to be overseen by an international body, which is maybe non-existent at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that reflecting on what you're proposing as an answer, it's to me, very radical notion when I think about, for example, outside of the education context with self-driving cars. In the US, lawmakers are trying to figure out how to get the tiny handful of companies that are working on that technology to pool and share data so that their AI becomes smarter and so that the public actually has better information about accidents. And so even in that context, for companies to open up their war chest is really a challenge. I want to turn to the audience because I do think that there have been some very patient hands. I don't know anyone's name, and I don't even know who has a microphone, if there is one, or... There we go. I'll ask for it to go to the lady in the red dress, and then we'll go around. I won't forget you.
So my question is to Gaurav Kumar. So you spoke about personalized data, and you spoke how some students perceive better in terms of audio, some in terms of visual, some text. So can we have an approach, or can we even think about an approach where when we talk of personalized data, we even think about it in terms of the region where the students are being taught? For example, when the same curriculum is taught in the similar way in a school in a rural area and that in an elite school. So I think, can that be a dimension of personalized data?
I hope Mr. Das was not giving you inputs on the question. You'll sit next time. Yeah. Just kidding, sir. Okay, so yes, I guess it's a very valid point. So let me give an example. Lots of learnings which happen through our surroundings, the environment we grew, the family which we came from. To give an example, in certain part of India, you will have Kabirs, Dohas, being taught by grandparents, to inculcate right kind of ethics and values in you. Well, in some part of the world, you will have a Tukaram, couplets being taught by grandparents to bring that. So it is very important that you take the demographics, specifics of demographics in account while you create personalized learning paths. On a broad level, people talk about vernacular language, state board-aligned curriculum, which is very important to take that in account. But also, take an example of Uttar Pradesh as a state, which is bigger than 90% of the country in the world, right? As far as population goes, language goes, the local features go. How do you take in account of Eastern UP versus Western UP, and the kind of cultural differences which are there to create learning paths? So that's a very micro approach to do this. But yes, if we are talking about higher state of personalized learning paths, regional specific, these are very important and valid ones. And I believe there is some work happening. We may be little away from that day, but you would see that happening very soon. Thank you.
Can I ask for the mic to go just to the gentleman on this side who's been waiting? We'll go back and forth.
Okay.
Thank you.
See, what Gaurav said, I'll just add to that. Data is not only the data which is in curriculum, it comes. The data interaction also, how a child is interacting in a classroom. At what points is intervening when a say virtual lecture, virtual classroom is going on. So those things also need to be protected. Not only the performance of the child, how the child is interjecting in a person. All these things become very important because there is a rivalry within the classroom and how it goes out. See, data, as I think one speaker told you, is like individual. Like we have anti-slavery laws for individuals, we must have something like that also of a personalized behavior in the form the data. It becomes a data, a behavior of a child in a classroom.
Right.
All that is also very important, and we must, and that's what I think in the declaration which is going to come up, these things are being thought out. Thank you.
We can go to this side. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you.
Almost
Thank you.
there.
I hope you can wait for a minute. My question is for Dan and Anantadurayappaji. I spelled your name very correctly, I think. So my question is, internet is global, and we are talking about IPR, copyrights, data, information and all these things. But don't you think the policy making should be universal when it comes to, policy making and all these rules and regulations and combining them into a law? Don't you think the law should be universal? This is my question. Thank you.
I could just take this one. I think not only should it be universal, but you may have noted that I have a real philosophical problem with the distinction public-private. And the reason I have that distinction is equality. I had hoped that the internet would promote equality, and I see the opposite happening. To me, all the problems we have with data in terms of education is that education is a business. I don't think education should be a business. I think it should be a public service. I don't understand why the internet should perpetuate the situation where I go to some private school because my parents have money, right? And maybe some people in this room can't afford it. Everybody should have. Education should not be a business. As soon as we understand that, we don't have a problem with who owns the data and what is the value of the data, because it's not a business. Think of this genome thing, right? Everybody owns the DNA, right? Once we have established that principle that education is not a business, but it's a human right, it is actually a human right. It is actually a human right. Then we have established the business to create universal laws that will allow the internet to regain what it was originally, which is global and universal empowerment, which it is not today.
Oh, and Anantha.
So, distinguished dignitaries, one point which I would like to present before you, there are certain advantages which you derive if the education is in the private sector. Certain advantages are in the public sector. So, instead of having the private sector or a public sector, why not we think of having a PPP model, public-private partnership? So that the advantage of both the public sector as well as the private sector, both can be obtained. This is what I feel so. What is your opinion in this particular regard? And one of the slides you have mentioned about the National Education Policy 2016. It is not yet finalized, still in the draft copy. It is to be finalized by the Parliament. So, in the National Education Policy, I have read it already. Why not we think of giving more emphasis for the public-private partnership? That is what is your opinion in this particular regard.
And so maybe we want to fold that into...
Yeah, I am agree. Sir, let me tell you, already public-private partnership is already there. Earlier, the Planning Commission, now the Niti Aayog, and my department is also running through public-private partnership. So public-private partnership is put in place, but the mechanism, institutional mechanism in our respective state is lacking. And second, my point I'd just like to apprise you is that we have some kind of the misconception towards our own private and public institution. We have created that kind of. Let me tell you, my daughter, who is a 6-year-old baby, sir, she was in Delhi. She was going to one of the school, prominent school there. When she came here, she told me, "Pa, these are the opportunity are not here. What I'll do? Can we go back to Delhi?" So I used to build that ecosystem to her mind. Yesterday, sir talked about emotion. Then I took her to the beach. I show, Mama, the Delhi is a little pollution. Here you will get this. No, Papa, I am not comfortable because these are the parameters are not available here. Some of the parameters she inform me. As a father, what kind of capacity I build on her. That is, and since childhood we are keeping, if you will go to private school, you will get this opportunity, you get a horse riding, you will get this kind of opportunity. If you go public school, these are the not. So we ourselves has created, because we have our money. I came from a very poor family, one of the Kalahandi district of Odisha. I struggle a lot in my primary, still now there is no proper education also, let me tell you. I went to Delhi, I did my higher education there. So these are the things we have to learn, and that capability we have to build. Our next generation, my extended family generation who are there at my village should get that kind of capability because of me. So we have to extend our help. Everybody has to help single thing that goes to large. That is lacking, sir, and government cannot do. We have to do in our individual capacity where we stand. That is very, very important to the economy.
Anantha, did you want to respond to the last couple of questions?
I think the only response I have is that we have to do a total rethink of the economic model. I think we are clutching at straws when Dan said it's a public good or a public service. But there's the number of inconsistencies or incoherences that emerge very quickly. Education, unfortunately, does not exhibit the pure characteristics of a public good. It has characteristics that it can be privatized. That's the problem. I think it's, in economics we have two properties to define if it's a public good. And once it's a public, if it has those properties, then it lends itself easily to be delivered as a public good. But unfortunately, education has only one out of the two. So it is somehow semi. So there needs to be active public, or rather when I use the word public, government intervention, regulatory interventions. I totally agree. It has to be what I call a social good, which means it's a moral right, a moral imperative that education should be provided. It's a human right. I like the Kantian moral imperative. The human rights are always, there's a great discourse with Amartya Sen on human rights and human freedoms or capabilities. And one, of course, is a legal, is the human rights with that legal, but it has to come from within, the emotions. The emotional part has to be driven by the moral imperative, not just to be defined by legal systems. We don't need the legal systems, because if it's a moral imperative, we are driven by that. But my contention always is that economic model is one of our greatest enemies that we have. The whole thing about IP and property rights is because of the money that is brought out. It's about monetary rewards. So I have no answers again, I'm sorry, for a new economic paradigm, but I like the whole notion that, in fact, I think our discussion is still within this environment that we have right now. But thinking ahead, how AI is going to change this whole notion of, and we had a very nice discussion recently in Paris with Sadhguru and a neuroscientist, and somebody came and asked about AI, and his response was, great, because we won't have to do a lot of the work that we are doing, mundane works, and we actually have time to learn how to live and not just to earn a living. So I'm really looking forward to those days where I can sit and read and contemplate and meditate and nurture.
That's my version of that. Is I'm waiting for the AI that studies writers, takes our ideas and puts me out of a job because it's learned from me how to do the storytelling, and now there's no point to me, which is another aspect. Yeah.
Look at what happened in China.
Yeah.
You and AI-driven news
Use the mic.
are coming in.
Right. Please.
Hi, I'm Manoj Kumar. I'm glad that AI is doing a lot of things which people can't, which people are not able to previously.
Please continue.
Yes. So
Yes.
my question is, what if the ecosystem is pulled out for student life? Maybe because of any reason, like maybe some natural calamities or floods, and if the student has to adapt to the new system. So the student is previously being spoon-fed by the AI. So how will he learn in the new ecosystem, sir?
And so the question is, what is the question exactly? It's how will this,
So we are developing AI ecosystem right now
Yes.
for the students to adopt to it, to personalize learning and
Yes.
create a new environment. So what if that system is pulled out from the student life who is adopted for it, say 2 to 3 years? He has to learn from by picking it from himself. There will be no one to assist him. So how will we be able to cope up with it?
please?
I guess, assumption is little invalid if I may start by that. Because you should also understand that this is not a monolith, this is not a black hole. AI-led teaching system is not a black hole. It's quite interactive. You know, as a learner, you interact with an AI system and it interacts you back and guides you in the process. What if the teacher which was teaching me for the last 3 years had a cardiac arrest? Will my learning stop? It doesn't stop, right? Similarly, an AI-driven teaching system stops for whatsoever reason. You know, while I don't believe in that natural calamity will, kill it or, make it vanish. But, so assumption is a little misplaced. It's rather going to be a great help. And I don't see the doomsday coming where the system vanishes and learning stops.
Mine is not about doomsday. Like say Kerala floods, we have Kerala floods, and the students are not able to visit the school for several days. And in that case scenario, the students will have to keep learning for the weeks also. But there will be no system to help them. In that case,
Let's do one thing. Let's meet after this session, because I see clock ticking, and I will take through this. Okay? Thank you.
I say we have time for one more question, and let's go to this side of the room. I see a young woman in the back with blue glasses. Final question.
So I just wanted to bring the discussion back to Aarti's contention of whose benefit is at the center of the discussion. And we work in schools in Pune, and we see that, mostly resource-poor schools have been flooded with edutech of various kinds. And the pursuit of what data that technology will throw up, there is an absolute ignorance or not existing socioeconomic data of the students is completely being ignored. So whatever is available in the market at the moment is what is being flooded in the schools. So again, whose benefit is at the center of this debate? Is it the students? Is it the teachers? Is it the schools? Is it the public school system? Or is it the industry and the market?
Please, Nanda. Thank you.
Very simple. It has to be the student. It is, that's what I'm saying. We have to always focus student, student, student. And in fact, child. Education is for that. And it's not for the industry, it's not for the teacher, it's not for the school leaders. The child has to be central in every effort that we make. We have lost that. And we don't listen to the child. And a lot of times we think that the child is not able to tell us. That's totally untrue. The child knows. And in fact, in our own personal experience with my son, we listened to the teachers for too long a time. And then finally when we went to a child psychologist, he says, always listen to your child. The child knows, and we should have listened to him much earlier, and we would have had much better interventions. They know best.
Just to add, Aarti, if I may. I guess, ma'am, it's very important that educators, school owners, principals, leadership understands the kind of role EdTech has to play. You used the word flooded with EdTech solutions. I will speak with many school owners, large chain operators, and say every week I have at least 30 requests from various EdTech companies to come and present their solution, and I'm lost. I don't know what to choose, what to drop. And that's not a problem of India, that's a problem everywhere. And you have so many startups, as you rightly said, so many solution providers. Hence, it becomes very important that there is a parallel intervention at a school leadership role to help them understand what kind of solution they should prioritize, and how they should take help of edtech solutions to drive the kind of outcomes they expect. Because as Ananta says, at the end of the day, it has to be a learner, it has to be a child, it has to be a student at the core. So the conversation has to be a little different there. Go and the way I requested public agencies to speak to data owners, people who understand data privacy right better, to understand how do they protect data for a school child once they engage tech solution providers. Similarly, school operators, school owners, principals need to engage better to understand the kind of solutions they want in terms of priority order and how minimal drives the maximum exponential kind of output they want.
Thank you. So the timer is blinking and we are out of time and wrapping up. The one thing I'd ask is please feel free to speak to our panelists after the session with additional questions you have. And one key takeaway I have from this is it sounds like the technology conversation is spurring a conversation and reflection about the dynamics, the field that it's entering into. And it seems like those dynamics, the power dynamics, the who protects the interest of the student, and what's happened in the economics of that, that seems like a very heated and rich area on which the technology is now coming onto, but it's not a clean slate at all and very complicated. But thank you very much for joining us.